Books from Korea. It's been a while since I made a video about books from a certain country, so I've just finished a book and I really wanted to talk about it, so I thought I'd make a video talking about a bunch of books from South Korea. Going forward, I'm going to be referring to it as the Republic of Korea because I want to make a video like this for the DPRK in the future. So you can pick up the books from the description down below or get them from your local library. Let's get right into it. I want to start off with the book that inspired this video, which is Ji Young-han's Honey in the Wound. This book is, oh my god, basically, I picked up this book because I read a review of it. Well, I read a description of it which compared it to another book that's going to be on this list, and we'll get to that when we get to that book. But this book is a multi-generational historical novel with a touch of magical realism in there. It is heart-wrenching, it is thought-provoking, at times it is really lovely and sweet, but overall really shows the utter despair people have gone through in our history, but also how everyday people can try and combat that, and how even when they do, it is hard and painful. So, okay, I don't want to spoil it, but basically the book follows our main character, Yeongdo, although it does talk about Yeongdo's family beforehand as well, for I think like the first quarter of the book. Her grandmother, her grandmother, grandfather, and her father, and her grand aunt, or her aunt, and then talks about her mother as well, and then kind of moves into just being Yeongdo's life basically in occupied Korea. So obviously we know Japan was brutally occupying Korea, large swathes of China and much of Asia as well. So this is specifically talking about Yeongdo, who it's basically following her life as from a child until the end of her life, and the horrible things that she had to go through in under Japanese occupation of Korea, Manchuria, and then sort of back to Korea again. And it's obviously, if you know the history of what the Japanese did to people across Asia, it is horrifying. Like, I mean, in particular, if you don't know about comfort women, it is still something that Japan to this day does not acknowledge that they did, or at least they sort of acknowledge it, but also try and sweep it under the rug. It is absolutely, it was disgusting and horrible, the things they did to women across Asia, and young boys and men as well. And a good portion of this book does go into very visceral detail. The way it is written is very, very visceral and very intense. And if you think about it, it was probably even worse. And the way Han describes the emotions that Yeongdo and the other women are feeling, and the actions of the Japanese and the treatment of the Japanese towards them, it is so intense and so detailed. But then also to think it was probably even worse. It was probably even more vicious and dehumanizing. And at multiple points throughout this book, I was crying, and it got it. You know that feeling when it's just I can't even put a word towards it because I don't know how to describe the feeling it gave me. And mind you, this is Han's first book as well, so it is amazingly written, plot-wise, just heart-wrenching, and there's so many things I want to talk, like, I want to talk about the different beats in the book, but I don't want to ruin it, because especially because it's a very recent release as well. But genuinely, if you can stomach it, because it is hard, you know, I really wanted to finish the book, so I got through it in a week. But this is the sort of book where I would probably typically like take a break, but it was. I feel like I'm not doing it justice. I had a whole thing planned out to speak about this book, and now I'm just thinking about the emotions it gave me, the thought process I had, and it's just. And even it goes into. It does something similar to the next book we're going to talk about, where it also talks about life after occupation. It talks about. It briefly touches on the Korean War, and it briefly touches on the student protests in the Republic of Korea against the military dictatorship, and also talks about the life of the Japanese Koreans, so Koreans of Japanese people of Korean descent, which I'll put the word here, I don't want to mispronounce it, but speaking of that in particular, if you like the book Butter, the author actually dropped their Japanese publisher very recently because their Japanese publisher has a magazine imprint which printed an article that was very discriminatory towards Japanese of Korean descent, and she decided to drop it, the publisher, in defiance of that. And also, I mean, if you don't know, I'm a big wrestling fan. There is a Japanese wrestler of Korean descent who I really like, and unfortunately there are stories of him being frozen out of the locker room by other Japanese wrestlers because he's of Korean descent. There is one wrestler in particular who is a very big fan of the current Prime Minister of Japan, who we can then talk about, who is a ultra-conservative, who I don't think she anymore says what the Japanese did to women didn't happen. She doesn't say that anymore, but you know, she is part of a party and a wider part of Japanese society which says, you know, it's overblown, it didn't actually happen like that, oh, the government wasn't really involved in it, even though they were. They systematically did these things to particularly women across Asia. She goes and prays and, like, it's not like laying a wreath, but there is a shrine in Tokyo, which is also mentioned in Honey in the Wound, where it is dedicated to Japanese soldiers, but it includes the Japanese war criminals from around the World War II period. And very regularly she goes and pays her respect at that shrine, which is just awful and disgusting and tells you a lot about sort of Japanese society at the moment. But sorry, I veered off from the book itself just to give some more context. But it's not just, you know, they're talking about Yeongdo as a comfort woman. You know, she works in a tea shop in Manchuria for a while. Still the treatment of Chinese and also Koreans in by the Japanese when it was occupied. You know, the treatment of Koreans in by the Japanese soldiers, you know, quite a while before World War II as well. It goes into great detail. It's so well written, and like I said, if you can feel like emotionally robust enough, I highly recommend it. It is a very, very heart-wrenching novel. And I mean, if you are a regular viewer, you know my feelings about occupation, colonialism, the rights of the people to resist it. I mean, this video is going out on the day where there was the big Nakba Day march happening in the UK. So, you know, you can see the parallels in this book and the action of occupiers. So, sorry, I've gone on way longer for this book simply because I can't, like mentally it is still playing on me, because I've literally finished the book less than 24 hours ago, and it's just still the emotions I'm still processing. this book, and again, for a debut, it is incredible. The next book we're going to be talking about is Pachinko, which is the book that Honey in the Wound was compared to in the review. The review was like, if you like Pachinko, you should read this book. So okay, I'll read it. Pachinko, it tells a not the same story. Pachinko is about a young Korean, well, it's the life of a Korean woman, and also I think it also talks about her mother and also her children as well, her children's life and family as well, kind of similar to how Honey in the Wound kind of talks a little bit about our main character's family beforehand and then her family afterwards and her relation with them. Pachinko isn't particularly about a Korean woman's experience going through things like being a comfort woman, but it is her experience being a Korean in Japan, because many Koreans were either forced to go to Japan or were sort of had to go to Japan because to get jobs, the Imperial Corps became the only place where you could really get work. And so she is sort of put in a position where she is almost forced to have to go to Japan, and sort of her treatment there during the war, prior to the war, her family's treatment. It's not the exact same story because there are other elements to it. You know, there's not the magical realism that is in Honey in the Wound. It is more just based in realism. There are more, I would say, some more family dynamics at play in Pachinko compared to Honey in the Wound, or at least for the entirety of Pachinko, there were more family dynamics. In Honey in the Wound, that comes more towards the beginning and the end of the novel. But again, Pachinko also does go into great depth about the discrimination Koreans faced in Japan, the treatment of people of Korean descent in Japan post World War II as well, the effects of Japanese imperialism, again, more so particularly focused in Korea in Pachinko, whereas Honey in the Wound does also explore Manchuria as well as China. So not exactly the same. I think Pachinko, you don't need to be as like emotionally robust to read it, but it is still a deeply heart-wrenching story. It is a generational story, which I think is, as I'm getting older, I think I'm appreciating generational stories a little bit more as well. But an equally extremely well-written book. Obviously, I can talk about the plot and the themes and how good those are, but the writing themselves in both Honey in the Wound and Pachinko is written very well in an engaging matter. Honey in the Wound feels... It's the type of book I know I couldn't write. It's very descriptive. It's very... you can get this... The way it's written, you can really imagine what's happening. I'm not the kind of person who can actually see things in my mind when I'm reading, unfortunately. But it feels so alive, and Pachinko does a similar thing to that. Everything feels very alive, and it's breathing and you can see it, and they're both just plot aside, because I don't want to focus, plot isn't the only thing that's important, but the actual quality of the writing in both instances, in my opinion, is very good. They're quite lengthy reads, obviously, and I know I'm talking about them together, but it's because I read Honey in the Wound because of Pachinko. But they are both extremely well-written books beyond just the plot and the themes. Just the actual quality of writing is very good, and both books, even though they are heart-wrenching, are ones that I just had to get through. I just had to finish them. And I don't remember how long it took me to read Pachinko, because I read it maybe 2 years ago. But Honey in the Wound took me a week, Pachinko maybe about 2 weeks. And they're quite lengthy books, but very, very engaging, and also very important, and hopefully, the kind of books where you will read about Korean history and want to actually go off and actually understand and learn more the crimes of the Japanese. But also, I should have said this in Honey in the Wound, I don't think the intention of either book is to make you hate Japan, to hate the Japanese people. You know, myself, I know this is a fault for myself. I'm quite, you know, emotional when it comes to these things. But I'm sure, well, I'm not 100% sure. I've not spoken to the authors, but I don't think the intention is to make you hate Japan and hate the Japanese people, but it is to actually make you see the true light. I think Honey in the Room does. I feel like it goes a little bit more harsh, which I like. I think it's a good thing. It's a little bit more skewered, and it should really, considering the things that our characters go through. It is a much more like intense like critique. Pachinko does have that critique, but I don't feel like it's as intense. It is a little bit more around the story in itself, but you know, I don't think the intention for either author is, and that's why you should hate the Japanese, but it is also meant to be a critique of Japan, and also, you know, kind of the way the Japanese view what they did to these people. Now, going forward, we're going to be talking about authors, because I've read multiple of their books. So the first author we're going to be talking about is Hwang, who in particular wrote The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly and A Dog Who Dared to Dream. These are the two works that have been translated into English that I've read both of. I read both of these in about 2016, so about 10 years ago, 9 to 10 years ago I read these. I was very young, and I think these were the first books, or like part of the first few books, where I really kind of started understanding and seeing the emotional depth of books. Also, some of the first books I read that were probably translated fiction. And I'm also pretty glad at the time I read them was around the time where I was also reading, unfortunately, Murakami, who again, we do not like here. And I feel like these were part of a collection of books that I read that really kind of veered me away from going down the Murakami route, you know, reading, you know, misogynistic authors almost, because they were like lauded in our society at the time, and unfortunately still so in some cases. But I digress. These two books were just emotional daggers. I remember The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly slightly better than The Dog Who Dared to Dream, simply because I think I read it a little bit later. But basically the themes it's addressing, I think the latter one is addressing things like motherhood, being different, being an outcast almost. The Dog Who Dared to Dream, I think, has similar themes but not quite the same. I do feel like the second one is a little bit more about sort of like brutality and brutal treatment. Hwang Seong-mi, obviously, I think born in 1963, so probably would have lived through the student protests, maybe even firsthand. Maybe I think she might be a little bit young for actually being involved in the student protests, but seeing the student protests, likely lived under the ship in Korea as well. So kind of seeing, it's like The Dog Who Dared to Dream, I did feel like probably is a little bit more of a reflection of, you know, the brutality of society, especially in these harsh conditions, you know, being kind of beaten down, even when there's some hope, being beaten down again. The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly, I think also maybe, in my opinion, felt a little bit more of a, almost this freedom that the hen almost gets through its raising of, I believe it's a swan, and the almost not necessarily living vicariously through your child, but also the joy that having, you know, that family can bring you. And even if, you know, you're not necessarily, because I don't believe the swan and the hen have the best relationship for the entire book, but also the things you can learn from one another is what I got out of The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly. Obviously I did read these books about 10 years ago, and I very briefly did some looking into the plots of them, and at the time I was reading these books I was learning about sort of oppression that people faced, and then also kind of, you know, family and emotional stuff you kind of learn around that age as well. And I felt like I read these two books at the right time for me. And finally, I can't make this video without mentioning Han Kang, Nobel Prize winner, writer of The Vegetarian, Human Acts and The Greek Lessons, the 3 books I'm actually going to be talking about. So, in particular, I think Human Acts is important when I'm talking about these other books, because Human Acts focuses on Korea, the student protests in Korea against the military dictatorship, and kind of the impact it has had on Koreans since, something that is alluded to particularly in Honey in the Runes. It's alluded to that towards the end of the book. Han Kang's writing, I feel like the 3 books I've read have come in very different times in Han Kang's career, and to me have been, and I've also read them in very different times. You know, I basically read them over the 3 books over 10 years, as in like Vegetarian I read 10 years ago, Human Acts I read about 5 years ago, and then I read The Greek Lessons in 2025. And all these books felt like Han Kang's, the things she's addressing and the themes are evolving and changing, and obviously I don't know which came first, Human Acts or The Vegetarian. I should Google that before making this video. But kind of as I've changed and as I've read these books, you could feel there's a change, and I feel like that's such a great thing about Han Kang. And again, not to bag on Murakami again, even though we should. When it came to the Nobel Prize for Literature, you know, there were certain groups who were like, yeah, Murakami's got this in the bag. But his books are the same. They've all been the same from start. And I've read almost all of his books, so I did it for a video, and I felt like I punished myself, and the video didn't do very well. Anyway, there was nothing new. There was no new substance across those like 12 books. But the 3 Han Kang books I've read, I felt like there was difference, there was change, there was variety. And the Han Kang books, again, also, I think none of these books I mentioned are for the faint of heart. Yeah, absolutely none of them. That's the kind of books I read. Obviously, I'm sure there is more light-hearted Korean novels. I'm sure from the Republic of Korea there are probably so many more light-hearted novels. It's just not what I read. But Han Kang's books feel like there's such a breadth to them, especially the 3 I've read, and I've got another one of her recent books that I need to read this year, that you're going to get such a variety. And also the themes are going to be investigated very deeply. You know, obviously there is that thread through them, that there is this focus on the treatment of women in Korea and the lives of women in Korea. You know, even though I've criticized Japan, you can't say the Republic of Korea is perfect either, obviously. But you can feel, you know, the way Kang is going through these books, and you know, obviously I have the benefit of having read the books over 10 years. I'm not going to say to you, hey, space out Han Kang's books over 10 years as you read them, but I felt like it was a unique circumstance under which I read Kang's works. And having read The Greek Lessons, really great book, very different, again, like I said, to Human Acts and The Vegetarian, who, well, obviously The Vegetarian was extremely famous, I believe, when I read it. I think I read it around the time it was getting really big here in the UK, so 2000, again, 16, 17. But yeah, absolutely superb author. So those are some books from the Republic of Korea that I wanted to talk about. Again, Honey in the Runes is the one that really inspired me to make this video, because I read it and I was like, I need to talk about it. Actually, there is one light-hearted book I have read from Korea. It is the Yeongdo, I'm not gonna say it, Smiley Laundry. I read this book before I read Honey in the Rune, actually, and it was very light-hearted. It was very nice. It was healing fiction from Korea, and is actually a lot better than much of the healing fiction I've read recently. So one not sad book that I read that you should go off and read. Actually, it's a very nice read. I got it from my local library. You can probably get it from yours too. So there you go. One not depressing read compared to the rest that I've spoken about in this video. But let me know any books from Korea that you recommend. Hey, maybe even books that are, you know, similar to Smiley Laundry, that may laundromat. I've got another book about a laundry place which I think is from Korea as well that I've not read. But let me know in the comments down below what you think. I'm really interested to see what books you want me to pick up from the Republic of Korea. There is one book, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, from the DPRK, which is translated from English, that is actually written in the DPRK, which I will pick up. It's a bit expensive, but I will pick that up and read it in the future, and hopefully I can pick up some other ones and make a video as well on that. But let me know any books from the Republic of Korea that I should read. And you know, before we finish the video, I want to say a special thank you to my members. Members get bonus videos, bonus content, movie club, book club, other bonus videos. You can join from as little as £1 a month by hitting the join button down below or on my channel. But alas, thank you for getting to this part of the video. If you have, leave a tiger emoji in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, share the video with a friend or family member. And hey, I hope you read a great book today.